Hello and welcome to the County Chat. We're back chatting away about county cricket, and today we're very lucky to have a special guest, the first ever here on the County Chat channel. We'll just be talking all things county championship, a lot of things just on our minds and about the world. Who knows, we'll put the world to rights at some point. But here he is, it's Omkar Khot. Welcome on in.
Good evening and welcome, or rather, sorry, thank you for the welcome, and really good to be joining you. I think having to the realms of my old podcast days from my one season of a very average multi-sport podcast that you may have tuned into before sort of never leaves you, I guess. But yeah, really good to be joining you, and what an honour to be the first guest on the County Chat in your illustrious short history. So yeah, really looking forward to the next hour or so, and offering some dulcet and hopefully vaguely interesting opinions on the state of the game and any other interesting questions that you've got lined up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. It's good to start with two just pure fans of county cricket, and we can just waffle on, and perhaps in the future we'll have some more esteemed guests, but we know where we came from with the great man. So anyway, I guess we're just going to kick off with a very, very sort of basic icebreaker, as I almost put it beforehand. But sort of, what's your favourite thing about the county championship, or just, English cricket, the beautiful game, the creams, all of that, as we've just been discussing. But what's your favourite?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, sometimes, if you're keen, I think there's a further point, without waffling already, but on what makes, I think, cricket, or first-class cricket, special anyway, particularly in this country. And I think for me, not just that viewpoint around all the unique grounds that it's played at. I think in England we're very lucky to have things like outground cricket and festival cricket that still takes place. I'm not sure around the rest of the world, in first-class competitions, or indeed in one-day or even T20 competitions, how much of that sort of cricket takes place, around a state or around those kind of smaller grounds. We've seen, the beautiful Cheltenham College ground across a lot of the press this week, and of course Barbados, where Sussex are about to play from tomorrow. And I think some of those unique aspects of what festival cricket brings, I think bringing it around the community, around the county, there's a reflection, I guess, of how popular when the new Wembley was being built, not to digress to another sport, of when England were playing at the Stadium of Light at Old Trafford, how popular that was. Beckham's goal, obviously, that really famous one at Old Trafford against Greece. So I think the way that county cricket actually takes the game to the community is very, very special. Not everyone gets the opportunity to watch England, and not everyone gets the opportunity to watch their own county at their main ground. I know growing up in Sussex, it was fantastic to go and see Sussex playing at Horsham. It wasn't always possible to get to Hove. I think a very quick point as well, which we may digress or go into a bit further in the podcast, is the capping system as well. I think that's a really unique and special thing. I've been talking to my housemate a lot recently about the roses at Lancashire and Yorkshire, and how if you're an uncapped player, you have your rose bud, and it's a real recognition of your kind of duty and longevity within a club, and what you've given, to be given that kind of honour and privilege to wear that fully bloomed rose on your cap or on your helmet as well. So two quick things, I just guess, to recap: the capping system for sure, and then that unique sort of outgrounds aspect of county cricket as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly why people find it so charming. I guess it's such a unique thing because people get so into it. You might just background know of it, but then once you know about all of this sort of things, because I must admit, I think I've heard reference of this Lancashire capping thing, but I actually don't think I knew the full backstory and all of that, and instantly I love it without even knowing without you fully explaining. But I think it's what makes county cricket so great, and why I love it, and why I'm so, almost the reason I began doing the County Chat was because there just didn't feel like there was that much discourse about something I loved so much. And then I was seeing headlines about them doing less county cricket because of the schedule, and it was like, what? I'm sure there's people out there who love it, and I think for all the reason you've just said, because stuff like community and stuff like the fact that there's outgrounds and all of that kind of stuff, I think is so special. And I think it really and the fact that you can have fans who travel just all around the country, and they'll kind of see this whole country and how unique it is, and all the different places and all the different accents and sayings and doings of various places. As you say, Barbados, Sussex will be there, and it's a beautiful thing. So no, I think you're sort of spot on. I think those two things are kind of right around, I guess, why, well, not spot on, but almost right around why anyone who loves it or gets right into the county championship has such a love for it, because it is so unique and it is so it's almost nostalgic without knowing much. I don't know the history of it all that well, but it's like it feels like something that's always been there and is constant. And as you were saying before when we were just chatting, is that like it's in a very ever changing world where there's so many things getting shorter formats. The podcast still exists and is a big thing, and the radio show still exists, but there's also TikToks which are 10 seconds long, and it's the shorter the better almost. And there's something beautiful about 4 days at a ground, and the ins and outs of how the conditions change and all of that. And then that's more of almost a soliloquy on the beauty of red ball cricket and the 5 day and the 4 day format, because of how things change and all of that kind of thing. But I always love the fact that when you watch a county game in Durham in April, like it could be literally snowing, and there's some aspect to that, or but at the same time, because it's just the beauty of the essence of where you go and where you could be. And players might talk about going to Durham in April, like seeing it on the schedule, like it's the most terrifying thing. So yeah, I guess on the other side of it, is kind of what is the thing that irks you the most, or what would you would say? Because we were discussing how you want not just to talk about what might be annoys you, but what might be the solution to that. So anything that you see you might want to change, or you just want more of an emphasis on, or whatever.
Sure. The pre-conversation obviously we spoke about a solution which I'll come to, which is not necessarily strictly on county cricket. You could argue in this day and age that when we come to it, the solution is already happening. But I think the tricky bit for me, and ultimately I've basically become very interested in the game overall, very interested in the county game overall. I feel nothing that special. All I've done is kind of follow what was in front of me and what was put in front of me when I was younger. And what I mean by that is it was never heavily marketed to me. It was very popular in the area where I grew up. It was great to play at my local club, which was at the end of the garden, and all those sorts of things. And I think getting to see Sussex in my hometown was a big bonus, but ultimately where we come from, let's say, and I'm sure if you speak to people in Lancashire and Yorkshire, and I've just been on tour down to the southwest, all these sorts of places, it's a very, very popular game. It's what you do in the summertime. David Lloyd often talks about, in the winters it was always sort of playing football in the streets, and then it was almost that change of season, right, we'll put the stumps out and then we're playing cricket until September, October. So where I'm going with this point, I think, is the championship was always the first and foremost thing all the way through the season. And I think the thing that's really kind of irking me nowadays is that, that really heavy structure. So it's the way that it's structured. So I don't, thankfully we still have a reasonable amount of county cricket to watch, championship cricket to watch, which is great. But ultimately that, heavy block at the beginning of the season, we've been very lucky this year because the weather's been great. But ultimately we could either lose lots of matches to poor weather. I'm not sure how keen the players would be on standing out there in 5 degrees at Durham, or even at Hove where it can get pretty cold sometimes. Yeah. A fantastic image I should just quickly digress on from years ago, and I think it was printed in a Cricketer magazine or one of the Wisdom books. Was a man, what's now the sort of media box, I guess, at Hove, what used to be the Gilligan stand, and I think there are still some seats on top of there. Yeah, and there was somebody watching a championship game in April, fully attired in a sleeping bag for the day's play.
That is excellent.
It's kind of one of those things where you ask at the beginning, what do you like about camp? I just think, it may not have any meaning to it, but whether it's weird or not, it's certainly very interesting. I'm yet to see, even in the Winter Olympics, there are not people stood there watching the downhill skiing in a sleeping bag, are they? Just to keep warm. So all these sorts of things. But anyway, I think the sort of block of championship at the beginning, and then we get that sort of token games now in sort of July. You might get the odd one in June as well, and then we're quite September heavy. There might be the odd one, and forgive me off the top of my head, I can't remember the card inside out, but I think we're due to have a few obviously in September that are more kind of Monday to Thursday as well. So when you think about just the way that it's structured, I think for the supporter there can be issues with obviously making it Monday to Thursday if you're a worker, and even for many students it's not in their school school holidays or university holidays, etc. So I think just having that regularity through the season of red ball cricket, I like that sort of format of not to put everything on festival or outground cricket, but I do like that format of something they've done at Cheltenham for a long time, Guildford, the likes, Colwyn Bay, to have that sort of championship game, and then maybe the Sunday you'd have that Sunday league game, or Tote Sport League as it was when I was growing up, and then, or maybe even the Pro 40, and then you'd have your that sort of short game at the end of your championship game at the same outground. I think it was just a really nice sort of 5-6 days or whatever it was of cricket.
Yeah, sure.
So mainly the solution. Sorry, I'm gapping a little bit.
No,
the solution
don't
I think would be, we were talking about this. This was more relevant, I guess, to England and Test matches. But the principle's still the same, which is free-to-air television and having cricket on terrestrial TV. So my point around what's going on now, at least, I guess, YouTube is available. All the counties have their matches available, I think, via ECB funding on YouTube. So it's fantastic to be able to at least tune in. But at the same time, I think where cricket's concerned, and that was more an international point around, it really was a huge game changer, I think, for a lot of people to have it once upon a time on BBC and then more recently on Channel 4 as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the issue is it's almost like, because of the interest and wanting to keep the interest in cricket high in the ECB and all the directives of bringing things like the 100 together, and we won't digress too much onto formats that have come and gone, but it's almost like you had this brilliant format and you had this thing, and you would just kind of you need to drive what makes this product great, and almost not change the product and change the goalposts and like, yeah, you're so right, like a day at the county ground or at an outground or wherever it might be, if it's played on a starting Thursday, ending Sunday, or whatever it might be, it makes it far more accessible and it makes it far more interesting, or more likely you'll go down. So it's funny because I feel like for everything I think sometimes it being done, which I think is really a positive thing, at Sussex this year I saw like the ground was full a lot more of the time for like T20 Blast games, because they were doing codes and making sure that the tickets were affordable and sort of things like that. But I think there's almost, as you say, like people like us stumbled into a love of county championship cricket. It's never going to be fed into you from a media point of view, or almost exploring what makes it great. And yeah, free to air. I think YouTube has made a huge difference for the county championship. I mean, you enlivened a point within me that I never really considered, but I guess my real love and badgery of it has come in that era. But for years gone by, that just wouldn't have occurred, and you wouldn't have been able to so easily know the county cricket's going on, and wherever you might be, if you've got service or you've got Wi-Fi, you can check out a cricket fixture going on anywhere. So I think things like that, subsidised by the ECB, absolutely excellent. But as you say, having games that are dotted around, and you almost have to remind yourself how the season's going. And I'm a huge cricket fan, but I remember like before this block of fixtures, I was like checking the table, being like, actually, do I even remember who was doing particularly well? And like you kind of ebb and flow. Whereas like to touch on other sports, even though there might be breaks, international breaks in the Premier League season or whatever other sport, you never lose a kind of flow of a season. Whereas I think with how the county championship season is now done, there is a bit of like, even the most ardent supporters of counties that I am with Sussex, and so are you, but anyone with any of their sort of respective club, you almost can lose track of how things are going, and then a player could almost play themselves out of form because they've played 10 games of T20 and done rubbish trying to slog it from ball one, but they were batting, because I feel like that's coming to mind here, like for Sussex, Tom Clark looked really good at the start of the season. He's a very good T20 player, played the T20 Blast, hasn't done so well, and then it's come back and is now doing second 11 stuff. And I'm sure fans of their counties around the country could be able to point to players where that happened. So I think you're spot on that there is almost a balance to be struck within finding new fans, but also what makes people already, players of cricket maybe want to be interested in watching cricket more often, or following along more ardently and supporting their county. Because I think touching back on the what do you love about county championship cricket and all of that, is that I think what I love is that there's so little things now that make you kind of proud to be from Sussex. It isn't really a thing, in America, like being proud of your state is a huge thing or whatever, and even in Australia and there's various places. Whereas you might be proud of the city you're from, or maybe proud to be northern as often a thing, but to be proudly, it's pretty much Yorkshire and Lancashire who say, is known about national pride of being from their areas. Maybe I guess, as you say, down in the southwest actually, but I think there's quite a nice thing about the county championship that you support for your county. I'm kind of losing where I was going with this point a little bit, but it's just the kind of making sure it's accessible and enjoyable, but kind of, I don't know, it's dragging people who, you know, probably play club cricket or love watching the test matches and watching England play in a test match, but might have no care about how Northamptonshire, you know, Essex, whoever may be playing. And I think it's like, you know, I think it's finding how the ECB and how cricket can get round the you know, and that's why the 100 frustrated me, because it felt like you were then taking away from what I thought was a great thing about cricket in England is that there's so many counties and that there's so many places you can support. So I guess, sorry, you go on, because I feel like I'm now just waffling and going between points and jumping around, but I think it shows I need someone to chat to in these podcasts, otherwise I just go.
No, sorry to interject, but I think that sort of really resonates with me around, you know, that phrase. And it's not, you know, it's not to sort of, I'm not necessarily losing sleep on this, but it fit that point around something being taken away from you, and it's almost, and obviously there are people with, you know, much worse problems out there, but for the sake of this conversation on sport, and for those that really are sort of passionate about, in this case, you know, cricket in general, or sort of proper cricket, I guess, as we'd put it, particularly with a red ball. It's that format, that the structure of the season when I was growing up, to me, and maybe partly because I was a child and I didn't really understand any different or know any different, but it feels like nothing was really wrong. It was fantastic. We had the championship. We were playing lots, I think 16 games then. Okay, Sussex had a great side, so it was quite easy to want to follow that a bit more anyway. But, you know, the Lord's final was still a big thing as well. So the other thing that you could argue was kind of, it's not championship cricket, obviously, but it was still a very traditional part of our season, was that big Lord's final. And that was taking place in often the middle of, or towards the end of July, sometimes in sort of mid-August as well. And typically on a Saturday, in my time anyway, or my lifetime, so or childhood. So those sorts of things. And now we're kind of, you know, it feels almost that something that wasn't broken has now been tinkered with, and we've ended up sort of not really, you know, some people are really hacked off. We've sort of gained some interest elsewhere, but maybe not, you know, for those that maybe have had their first experiences of coming to a cricket ground or to a cricket match through something a lot shorter. You know, how many of those people are actually going to convert to watching something longer, whether that's an England match, you know, maybe against Australia it would happen, but ultimately what's the likelihood of them, you know, converting into someone who might want to go and see a championship game? Again, that maybe remains to be seen, but it's just that point around, you know, that's the frustration in some ways. It feels like what was a system that actually for many young people in, again, just speaking for myself, and I guess in some ways the generation in the early to mid 2000s and sort of early 2010s, that sort of format of the season, or structure, didn't really seem to be broken. So yeah, there's just that point around kind of, you know, why have we had to change it? But maybe that's maybe more of a personal gripe than a general, you know, useful point.
Yeah. No. I think that's arguably what we need is. I think again, we're speaking of like the motivations around the county chat, was because I feel like there's so much discourse around county championship cricket which is almost missed. It's like this in football, there feels like there's every team has about 16 podcasts, and every, you know, fan channel has about 4 different people, or 50, you know, 20 different people who come on it, and there's not much to be able to just people saying, you know, they're just genuine opinion of it. Because, you know, it's funny because I have had a lot of people, as knowing me as a massive cricket fan and a massive, you know, fan of it, being like, I've absolutely loved the 100, like now I'll really, you know, tune in and watch some cricket when I never would in the past. And they'll, you know, be able to list off some names who, you know, maybe someone got a score who is a county cricketer who's never played for England in their life, and now one of my best mates is like knows who they are because it was on in the background in the pub, or, you know, they were just. So it's a funny one. It's like, in some essences you feel like, oh, it's actually bringing new eyeballs to the game, and I guess that's what the ECB would say, and financially, and maybe that is all that they care about. But then you get the other end of it, where the smaller counties then miss out, and you have the kind of the classic of the bigger get bigger and the smaller get smaller, and then, you know, now you see Lancashire, for example, had a really tough start to this season, but you couldn't ever think that it was going to last, because the amount of money they have to play with comparative to a Leicestershire, to a Derbyshire, to a clubs they were competing with in Division 2, and same goes for Middlesex. I think they were, at one point they were like the bottom two teams, and I had also predicted them to be both in the top three, so I was sweating a little bit. But then I was just thinking, but there was another element where I was like, no, there is just an inevitability that they will be able to turn this around because of the differentiator in money, and as we all know, in so many elements, they're not trying to go towards putting the worlds to right, but that can often be a problem, and there's a sort of a misreallocation of resources. But anyway, sort of speaking of county cricket and how the season's been going, I guess has there been any players or any teams that have caught your eye across the grounds, maybe when you've been following Sussex, or just the scorecards, or the like?
Yeah, naturally. In fact, I was speaking to someone the other day about I'd sort of forgotten. I said, did England score 800 in the first Test match? And it turned out I was thinking of Surrey, who broke obviously their record a few weeks ago for their own sort of county championship score, or highest first class score as a team. So or total. So naturally, I think Dom Sibley is the one that's standing out to me. There have obviously been others that have been standing out, some of whom I'm sure we'll come to. But I think the Dom Sibley point kind of stands out because there's always going to be these perennial players. We've had them. I'm sure other countries will have many of their own equivalents. We have several quite high-profile ones. I think in our country, someone like it kind of almost reminds me of that sort of Mark Ramprakash situation. There's someone that who's clearly a really naturally gifted player, who's a seriously talented player, but every time they get dropped from England, by default, almost like Ollie Pope, I think they're by default they're just going to score lots of runs, and it's fantastic to see. But I guess that it's not quite a sort of true answer to your question. I think the standing out part for Dom Sibley is more around, given it's such a big year for England as well in red ball cricket. Yeah, it's that point around, how do we, these players that actually will get dropped or have been dropped from the England setup after a reasonable amount of time spent playing for England as well. Yeah. That sort of dilemma. And I think their names tend to stand out because, England's opening combination, I think Ben Duckett is clearly a sort of more of a shoe-in now, a shoe-in with a small S if you don't want to completely cement him in. I think, he's really developed his game and been, he's one of the kind of closer to first name on the sheet names, you'd say, within that squad. If not already. So I think that second opener spot, that's not me suggesting Dom Sibley needs to play for England. It's not something I'm, overly fussed on. As long as England are winning matches, then obviously that's fantastic. But I think, anyway, this is a very long way of saying I think Dom Sibley naturally to me is the easy standout for so far in the season. No,
I think you're so right with Dom Sibley, and it was interesting that I think we'll mention the Kookaburra ball in a moment, but he has dominated the Kookaburra ball whilst playing this season. And what do you play down against in Australia, Kookaburra ball, and what do you do internationally? And I think it's interesting with someone like Dom Sibley because he's such a compiler, and it almost felt like, it felt to me that he must be batting quicker this season. And then I checked the scorecards, and he was the first to go past 1,000 runs this year and all of those sort of things. But his strike rate was still at like 43, and he had faced something like, and I could be wrong here, but it was like 4,000 more balls than the next closest batter. And I just was like just astounded by the fact that he can just bat for so long, and I think that makes it so appealing in a place like Australia where the attritional cricket is such a big thing. The kind of batting for 2 days and a bowling team just being totally worn out. I mean, I remember India batted for 2 days at Melbourne once, and they scored 400, but like not much over 400. But the Australian team were just done, and that's why it's the Test match, and it's such a big thing. I think it's funny because it's like I think Crawley's. It feels like he's coming towards sort of the last dance. Like if we go down to Australia, and the fact that he's a tall right-hander batting with a short left-hander doesn't pay off for us, then it's like, well, where is a batter who can hit the ball on the top of the bounce with long arms gonna be good if it's not Australia? And he showed like a bit of a sign of it with a 50 at the SCG when we got absolutely trounced last time we were there, but. I think no one at the time knew where England cricket would be going with Bazball and the like coming in the last 2-3 years. But I think Dom Sibley is a kind of perfect example where it's like it feels almost 100% that you won't go to Australia. I'd love an idea that they just thought, you know what, we can take a squad of 18, 19, and they go, well, if it all goes absolutely Pete Tong for Zach Crawley, that we've got Dom Sibley there and we know he's a good option. But again, it just feels unlikely. It feels much more likely that you'll have a 12th man, Jordan Cox, who's just there for the vibes, and he seems like a good chap and bats very well and fast and all of that kind of thing. I mean, I assume you would very much agree that it was such a refreshing moment seeing Liam Dawson selected for England. And the fact that he was a county championship sort of stalwart who scored buckets of runs and taken lots of wickets, be selected. I guess I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I had this conversation the other day with someone. I think as an ardent Sussex supporter, you've got to sort of bite your tongue a little bit, haven't you? But I think, or swallow a bit of humble pie, because I was glad to see him picked. I think he bowled. I like the sort of, he didn't get much out of the pitch, but I like this kind of fizz he was trying to get on the ball. I think he bowled at a good pace, and it looked like he just had, and maybe you could just say the simple point around, well, there's someone who's played a lot of cricket in their life at the sort of highest or second highest level. Yeah. He was just landing it exactly where he wanted to most of the time, compared to Bashir, who has struggled with, and I wouldn't even say only for England. I actually watched. In fact, I ended up going to all 4 days of Middlesex versus Glamorgan, right? Which is only down the road from where I live, so it was quite handy to get to. And I clearly don't have many plans on bank holiday weekends compared to the rest of the population. But
the better plans,
it felt like the line that he was bowling there was reasonably, certainly for a professional cricketer, for a Sam Robson or whoever at the top of the Middlesex order, it wasn't overly challenging. It didn't feel like it was really, spitting, or he was getting much fizz onto the ball. So I think, fantastic on the Liam Dawson side. I think that does just open up the window a little bit for your original question around standout players, because naturally Jack Leach is going to be one of them, who has taken a reasonably high amount of wickets already this season. But also, and I would say not just because he scored 100 and taken a lot of wickets in the last round, but someone that, a bit like Ben Foakes, just to chuck another name out there, has been, I think, a little bit. That's not to say that I'm, a non-Jamie Smith fan. Is Tom Hartley, who had a fantastic tour. I think debuting out in India, incredible performance, and then, cast away in the same way, if not worse, actually, than somebody like Jack Leach, who we thought was part of a, really kind of close-knit setup in the Stokes administration. But I think Leach and Hartley are probably two to mention there amongst, Liam Dawson. But point being, fantastic to see Liam Dawson in the side. You're not picked for your batting if you are there to bowl the spin, but he actually looked really, really good with the bat as well for the sort of short amount of time I watched him at the crease. Yeah,
absolutely. I think what's interesting with the England spinner debate, and again, as you've mentioned about sort of this massive year for England cricket, is that what I always found so boggling about Bashir as a decision is that everyone who could watch him could agree that his best ball is kind of that perfect off spinner's ball. I mean, this very tall man with, the whole thing that he had these massive hands, and, it was almost a joke when he first got selected. Like, I can't believe England have just selected a spinner just because he had big hands and bowled well to Alistair Cook. But it was this kind of like thing where he was so bigged up and this hype was around him that it was almost, like doomed to fail. But also, to your point that, cricket is this kind of skill-based sport, and especially spin bowling. And it's been the sort of story of all good England spinners that they've often come to fruition. Graham Swan springs to mind of sort of when they were 28, 29, even going into their 30s, is actually when their best years were as a spinner, because you get that guile and understanding your pace and being able to set your field better. Whereas, Liam, someone like Sher Bashir was, it was Stokes setting the field and he was just bowling the best he could. Whereas Liam Dawson it looked like he was in control and you could control an end. And again, being the badger that I am, I was looking at Graham Swan's economy and average in the Ashes in 2010-11 when we won, and he bowled to something like, he bowled lots of overs, but he bowled to something like an economy of like 2.75, but an average in the 40s or 50s. But he bowled a lot of overs. And to your point about Liam Dawson, it looked like he could just repeat the same thing. Is that he only took 1 wicket across this whole test, and I think I would suggest it's much more to do with the pitch than any lack of equality and a very quality batting lineup he was facing in India. But he kind of could consistently hold up an end in the second innings when we were trying to bowl them out, he got to an economy well beneath 2. Whereas I think Shoaib Bashir on a similarly unhelpful pitch would be quite likely to go at 4s or 5s, and has done quite consistently in the last 2 years. So it's interesting, down in Australia where, seam bowling does take a lot of wickets, and you need that to be the reason you're winning test matches and bowling, getting the 20 wickets. You're not, England aren't going to turn up with the next Shane Warne in Australia, who's one of the few people who consistently got wickets as a spinner in Australia, and Nathan Lyon, of course. We need a bowler who potentially can actually control some level of an end and rest your seamers, and to that attritional point of Test match cricket. It definitely enlivened a happiness in me that consistently excellent county championship performance won't just be overlooked. Another name, I guess, is Rayan Ahmed. He's averaged something like 60 with the bat and 18 with the ball. I really hope they don't pick him as a frontline spinner, because he hasn't been Leicestershire's frontline spinner in Division 2. He's taken lots of wickets when you come on to bowl, and with the Kookaburra ball in the week just gone where he took, 13 in a match. But I think it was even his dad came out and said he's not a frontline spinner, he's a batter who's a very good spinner. But and obviously his younger brother Farhan seems to be a bit of a prodigy when it comes to frontline spinners. But we're getting lost in the England spinner debacle. But it's an interesting thought of when, how are you going to win a series down in Australia? It seems to be all that the England setup care at the moment. Joe Root mentioned it. He was like, I couldn't care less about passing Tendulkar. If I could win a series in Australia, that would be all I care about, sort of thing. So I guess it's an interesting one for how the rest of this county championship season goes, and will that have much effect on the selection down in Australia?
I think it kind of, from a county cricket point of view, it almost, and I'm not trying to sort of back my own point here, but for argument's sake here, it does bring us back to that point around the structure of the season, because I mentioned Middlesex versus Glamorgan. That seems like a long time ago now, and it was pretty much in the context of this season quite a long time ago. So I think where we'd have a much more considered eye on individual players if there was that kind of more regular structure of 4-day cricket throughout the season, or dare I say even just 3-day cricket, whatever red ball format you want to put forward. The point is that a regular system of championship cricket would be really helpful, because then we're actually seeing, right, this person is and has done for a few seasons. So Liam Dawson is a good example of someone for a good few years now who has been a consistent performer, across that sort of weird, or in my opinion, that irregular, structured season. But actually, if we were, how much of, just for argument's sake, how much of a Rayan Ahmed performance in the last round is more of those, everyone comes and goes with, if that had happened in the first game of the season, a little bit like I think last year Sam North East started with a record score, first-class score at Lords, and then it was almost sort of destined to, right, well, has he just peaked for the season? Whereas, we can all have those, or regardless of what level of cricket I guess you play, there's always going to be that one-off week or one-off fortnight or whatever there, with the exception of Joe Root, who seems to just churn out runs day in, day out. But I'm sure you can see my point there, that the selection, definitely. How do we actually best select? It's not just around individual performance, but what's that? It's not just a one-off, individual performance, is it? It's that considered approach, which is actually this person has done it week in, week out, not necessarily on a cold Tuesday night in Stoke, but who has been doing it week in, week out throughout the different conditions of the season. Yeah. And ultimately, just coming back to your Graham Swan point, he had the advantage, and this is where sometimes a lack of championship cricket in general, or a lack of championship cricket for many of the people that perhaps England have got their eye on. You could chuck a Bethel in there, just for argument's sake, for someone that's been picked off the basis of not playing a lot of professional cricket yet in his life. Yeah, absolutely. Graham Swan had a good sort of 2.5 years, obviously, of playing Test match cricket, and a further, let's say, 10, 12 years of county cricket under his belt already. So you've already got a wealth of experience there in a Graham Swan. So in some ways, whilst he was an excellent off spinner, he also had that advantage. He was a bit of an anomaly because he was actually picked almost, or for the Test team rather, quite late into his career. Yeah, absolutely. But and that's the interesting thing when it comes to spinners. I mean, Liam Dawson's 35, Jack Leach would be something like 30,
4. And I don't think anyone's questioning whether or not they would be fit enough to play a 5-match Test series because of the what actually spin bowling puts into your body. So it's an interesting one where you feel like England are so focused on young talent and players that can be world class that then they kind of look past talent that's already there. And I mean, it's almost such a thing that I think happens in a lot of sports now, that youth and potential is almost more valued than actuality, what's in front of you. And I think that's why Australia's selection I've always actually been a huge fan of in the last however long, really, because it seems like they always pick the best, in their opinion, the best 11 cricketers in Australia. And it doesn't matter how old they are, and it doesn't matter how many tests they might be able to play in the future. But in this one Test series, Mike Hussey had a strange career where he made his Test debut in his late 20s or 30s, and is now remembered as this great Australian Test player. But for ages it looked like he was going to be always the bridesmaid, never the bride, and average 50 in first class cricket and never do it in Test level. And he had a 5, 6, 7 year long Test career, average 50 in Test cricket, and is hugely valuable, which I worry that Bazball and the selection policy around that has lost a little bit, is that so often looking to the future that you don't look at what could be really important in front of you. And that was why I thought the Liam Dawson selection was so sort of refreshing in a way, I guess. To sort of slightly move on, but kind of on the same-ish point, and obviously Kookaburra Ball is such a big point in this season's County Championship, and you referred to it earlier with the 800 Surrey scored, and that was part of a round of fixtures where the most amount of first innings runs were ever scored in County Championship history. And lo and behold, it was when England was in a heat wave and we had the Kookaburra Ball being bowled, shock horror, with modern bats and etc, etc, etc. We had, I think it was something like 4,000 first inning runs. It could be even more than that. I was reading the article today. But I guess what, as a broader point, is just what's your view on the Kookaburra Bowling in the County Championship? Where do you think it places? And obviously it was all built up after the 2021-2022 review of that Ashes, and basically was like, why does it look like we're as far as we've ever been from winning a Test series down in Australia? And Andrew Strauss at the time just thought one of the obvious things was a lack of experience with the Kookaburra Ball. Rob Key's taken over since and has even been even bigger of a fan of it, and it's only gone up. It went from 2 to 4, and I think it's stayed at 4 now, but 4 rounds of the County Championship being in with the Kookaburra Ball. Just, I guess, what your thoughts and how do you think it helps England?
Good question. I mean, it's maybe not the ball for me that is the most important thing. I think ultimately, if you look at since 2010-11, the series that we've lost, I don't think and I guess there's a point I'll come to, but we haven't really lost any of those series because we haven't managed to take lots of wickets.
Yeah.
Typically, the seamers have taken those wickets for England, but the Australians haven't actually scored massive scores in general. There have been the odd, games where Steve Smith has really kind of turned it on, etc. But actually, Australia, often are scoring around the kind of high 200s, maybe kind of mid 300s tops.
Yeah.
I haven't researched that for a long time, but the issue is that England keep getting bowled out for 120, 130, 150, and it's always going to be a struggle. So. Is the point that the Kookaburra Ball is hard to face? Unsure, because ultimately the problem with putting everything down on, and I'm not saying that Rob Key or Andrew Strauss or anyone else or Sir Andrew Strauss are, fixated on that point, that only changing the ball in the English domestic game will result in England winning down under. Ultimately, that ball is being used in Australian conditions, and I think there is probably so much more that you need as a cricketer when you look at the Strauss team and just the depth of not just talent but actually the kind of, I guess, the rigidity upstairs for lots of these players. These are guys that have performed at international cricket or in international cricket for a long time. They played in front of big crowds, lots of big game experience, whether that be in kind of one day matches, T20 matches, etc. I think that England T20 World Cup winning side, or World T20 winning side as I like to call it, came before that particular series, just as an example of big games where the likes of Kevin Peterson, not that he needed just that series to prove his worthiness in big matches. But I think the Australian tour is clearly more of a. There's more to it than just the ball. I've kind of gone off piste in terms of your question, but I think my answer is basically, I'm not sort of overly, personally fussed on which ball. It's what's more important. It's where the bowling attack are putting the ball in the right areas. And if you're facing the Kookaburra ball in England, where the pitches aren't going to be as bouncy and as quick as they are in Australia, with that extra element of, massive Australian crowds who are baying for your blood, etc. From the moment you get off that plane, you're given a fair amount of heat from the bus driver onwards, and I think all those factors for me kind of have a little bit more input than just the Kookaburra ball. And I think we've maybe, focused a bit too much on the wrong areas. Ultimately, your bowlers just need to focus on hitting the top of off stump or whatever plans they've got for, Smith and Labuschagne, etc. So, maybe I think there's been a bit too much focus on just that ball.
Yeah, I guess it follows to your point when I think it was something you said which really struck with me was that the issue in the last few tours is that we've been absolutely skittled out and finding ways to score runs against that Australian cartel, as they like to call themselves, and actually how do you keep it out? And I think it's funny that going back to our earlier point, and I think the county championship lovers' love of someone like Dom Sibley, but it's like, now we've built this batting lineup which feels like there is people who can score runs very quickly, as we know, with especially people like Duckett. I mean, Duckett, I feel like he doesn't even look like he's played a particularly Bazball-y, crazy, aggressive shot, and he's 90 off 91 balls because he's incredibly good at rotating the strike and running twos and etc. etc. But if you could have some people who can just stick around in your Dob Sibleys, that people like Pope, and Stokes and Brooke who try and score at that very alarming rate. I kept Joe Root out of that on purpose because he just accumulates without seeming to take risk like no other. And I mean, I think people will look back on his last 3 years as one of the greatest peaks of any batter perhaps ever, without getting too hyperbolic, which I have. But
nothing wrong with that.
I think in this case it's fair enough. But you're right that the batting might be more of the thing. I guess it's interesting, and I guess it's more of a long-term thing that they're looking at, that you want to try and build cricketers that are going to be good for England. And I think the Duke's ball and the uniformity around it meant that so many counties all the counties are their own independent bodies trying to win, that players who were never going to be England cricketers could be incredibly valuable. And they're trying to find a way to, force England into finding faster, taller bowlers who can kind of have success internationally. And I guess it's a bit of an interesting one. But you're so right in the fact that just because you use a Kookaburra ball at Taunton doesn't suddenly make it the whacker. It's sort of it's not necessarily shifting the sort of discourse or shifting the what is important that much. It's an interesting one, and I guess it will be. I think maybe that will be something that in 10 years' time it had an impact, and it's bled through the game, and that people are more strong around it. Because I think it's interesting. The people who have done particularly well with the Kookaburra ball are just people who have played more cricket internationally. So it's like at the moment it's not really proving who could be an international success. It's almost like the ones who've come, done okay, and then are now out of the England setup. Like in that Surrey innings, it was Sibley, Lawrence, Jackson, Curran who all scored hundreds. And what do they all have in common? They've played for England and now sort of don't, at least as regularly as they might like to. So it's kind of almost a reverse predictor. It's like, they've played with it before, so they might have more success with it. And the bowling side of it the other way around. Ahmed and Hartley both having used a Kookaburra ball lots with some good success in international cricket, and then in this one round where there was a bit more wickets taken and a few less flat pitches, that they were taking lots of wickets. So it's interesting, and I don't know if as you're saying, it doesn't necessarily make much of a difference for the now, but I guess it's interesting for the future.
But I think there's a good point. I'm going to broken record you a little bit here, and coming back to that structure of the county season, because we just seem to be year on year getting to a position where certainly most of the England Test or England centrally contracted / Test players are are seemingly playing less Championship cricket during the season. So actually, the amount of Championship cricket hasn't really changed a lot. We've gone, let's say, just for argument's sake, in my lifetime, from 16 matches to 14 matches. So that's not a massive difference.
Yeah.
But the availability of England players has changed massively in that. So yes, there are things like going out and playing franchise cricket, but actually just the general, whether it's a case of a franchise competition like the 100, interrupting in August, so nobody's playing anything red ball, whether it's for club or country in August, or indeed, there might be new programs around resting or rotation or whatever it might be that actually mean that, is there a school of thought that says the Strauss team, albeit was an incredible side, you've also got lots of people there that in their general cricket career have played a lot of Championship cricket anyway because of the structure of the season. So they were playing not just that token sort of block 4 or 5 games at the beginning from April, with one of those horrendous, pre-season games in March, which I think they tend to happen now. And then, you're speaking about the mindset, so the Bazball mindset, well, actually how much comes down to, during a season, if you're just able to go through a season knowing quite simply that you've got, longer innings that are required of you, rather than right, we've done our block of Championship, and now you've got the entertaining part of the season for your county, where you have to play X amount of blast games all in a row, and it's all on Friday nights under the lights, and it's all really good fun. But actually, the practical sense of what does that actually do for England building high scores in Australia? And just, I guess my point there is, it's more of a hypothetical question, but actually, if you're trying to build that roster of batsmen for that tour, I'd rather see every single month throughout the summer, because the summer isn't very long in this country in reality. And the weather isn't great for most of our summers anyway. So we need to make sure that, in my opinion, structure, means that every single month there's at least, let's say, 2 Championship games, or certainly maybe even more than that. But that I'm not going to sort of spell out the whole thing now. But I think that also comes into it a little bit for me.
I think you're right there, and I think it's an interesting one that. Yeah, because there's a lack of them playing in as many fixtures. And I mean, there is even suggestion of reducing the county championship fixtures down by another 2. And and then that's when you start getting to the worrisome point of, how are you going to produce, players and people who are ready for big fixtures and big games when it comes to playing 5-day test match cricket? Then you can't play. You're reducing the amount they play of 4-day cricket, which is meant to be the kind of preemptive pre-marker. I guess another thing I was interested in your take on, and I guess is a bit more of a hypothetical, whimsical thing in a way, is that there's always this talk about schedules, and I think and it's fair enough, because cricketers are not wanting to be able totally burnt out both psychologically and physically, but also then you can only have so many days in a summer, as you're saying, that British summers especially are quite short, and there's a struggle to literally fit everything in, especially when you add an entire different format. But the 4-day cricket in the Sheffield Shield, and I actually don't know if the Ranji Trophy is the same, and if correct, I actually don't know off the top of my head. But us having 4-day cricket. Would you prefer to keep the sort of amount of 4-day cricket that we have now, or kind of go a halfway house where you have less Championship games but they're 5 days, and that they're sort of trying to prepare cricketers more for what a 5-day test looks like, because it's a different kind of format? Or do you look at it like trying as much? I mean, because I think that'd be the way I look at it, is that you just want as much 4-day cricket as you possibly can, and 4-day cricket is so integral to what we love about county Championship cricket and all the things we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, pretty black and white for me. I'd keep the 4 days. I'm not overly fussed personally on. I don't think the 5-day. We can't just. I guess you could argue that the domestic structure of cricket. I think rugby union is similar as well. The domestic system to me does. First and foremost, it doesn't exist for itself. It exists to produce for the national side. And that. Unless you feel otherwise, I think that's very much why. I'm not saying why county cricket exists, but it's very much the priority or the main outcome that it's trying to kind of look for. So I think for the good of the county game, I think, I don't want to see less games, because even if they're slightly longer, I don't think, we're not sitting here. If you think about the England teams of old, Championship cricket used to be shorter, used to be 3 days. And, England haven't struggled to produce incredible cricketers throughout the history of the sport. And I think it's important that we keep the fixture card higher, because from a club perspective and just a pure fan perspective, let's say, and that's not me saying I'm not not interested in hearing, ultimately players are at work. Let's not forget that they're doing their job. So if there's, whether it's working conditions or it's a form of working conditions that they want to discuss, then obviously that's very much their right to be bringing that up with BCB and the PCA and whoever else they need to speak to about the structure or the scheduling. So, but it's important that clubs get to play each other. As simple as that sounds, because what you don't want is, because of scheduling of championship seasons or the way that things go, you want to make sure that Warwickshire are playing Worcestershire. You want to make sure that Derbyshire play Notts and Lancs play Yorkshire and Somerset play Gloucester and Sussex Hampshire and all the rest. I won't run through everybody.
all the close counties just keep going around the country. Yeah, no, I think you're spot. I think sorry to interrupt if you had a further point to make, but. Yeah, I think you are right, and I think that's the way I would look at it. It was actually, I'd never have had that thought before. It was literally as we were just discussing it here, and how do we try and maximise both summers, but also try and produce England Test cricketers. But I think you are spot on in the fact that I don't think the shift between 4 and 5 day will make much of a difference, and that almost consistently being in games and more games where you are in a red ball game and all the aspects that come with a multi-day format is super important, and it's actually that's more of a. I guess that's more of the issue is not that you get, you get players playing 5-day cricket, particularly. I guess, trying to just avoid anything that makes me want to just feel like the ECB should copy what Australia do, because I don't think we should do that. I think we should keep 4-day cricket. So it was a whimsical thought I had, and I think you're right to shut it down. So no, sorry, not that you.
Well, I didn't mean to
but I think you're.
It
was no. I more meant it in the sense of it's just you're right in that I think 4-day cricket is just it's a great thing, and I think it works for what it is sort of aiming to do. Another thing I guess I've just written here, and again I'm interested in your thoughts on, is that speaking of being prepared for tours to Australia, is that we have so many overseas players in our game, and we have so many more counties, and of course then the Kookaburra ball increasing has meant that Sussex being included in this is that you kind of almost getting Kookaburra ball specialists in, and you go Gurinder Sandhu for Sussex has been a prime example of that, and he's sort of playing just these 4 games when there's a Kookaburra ball. And I think around the grounds there's been plenty of around the counties there's been plenty of a sort of similar thing. So I guess what do you make of that? And because you don't want to get to a point where you're almost being like, well, we don't want to get overseas who are from Australia because they're Australians, because it's been like a bit ridiculous, because as you're saying, it's people's jobs and livelihoods, and it's something as simple as your nationality shouldn't affect it. So I guess just interested in your thoughts. Excuse me.
There's a wider point, I think, around overseas players than just the Kookaburra ball.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, again, I mentioned at the beginning of the pod I sort of said in very long ways 2 things that I felt were very unique, or what I love about county cricket. There were 2 things of many things I could go on into.
Of course.
Again, it's a very unique thing, isn't it, for us in our sports, because or in this sports, because the other big team games have never really had that, or certainly for a long time they've never had that cap on who you can actually select. So now when we look at football and rugby union, for instance. Yeah. It's a plethora of overseas players that are allowed to come and play, and in football, for instance, it's obviously well known in the top flight and all trickling down through all the leagues, really, or to a certain level. So that notion of an overseas player, and particularly something I had a little bit of, I guess, growing up, was that still it felt like a little bit of a last era of that. The great and the good would really come over. Shane Warne was still playing for Hampshire, and obviously Mushy became a Sussex legend after 1 or 2 seasons, and then he got really into his pomp, and his record, was just. I mean, he is really one of the club legends after a very short stint at that club. In reality, I think only sort of 6-7 years he was with the club. So we were at that. It felt like we were at that kind of last bastion of the old school overseas. We hear a lot of the older cricket fans will talk about the fact that they would come and watch Clive Lloyd and Malcolm Marshall and Curtly Ambrose and many other people, not just from the West Indies. I think that overseas point, and sorry, I'm saying this in very long terms.
No, as you should.
It's a very unique and special thing about cricket because it lifts. It really can. I mean, I cannot imagine the benefit to the dressing room. The lift that it has. If you're particularly for young cricketers, that's the point, isn't it? So we're talking about Australia. We're talking about producing people that, in my opinion, is the main aim of England cricket. What is the main aim? The ultimate aim, I would say, is not just to beat Australia, but to beat Australia in Australia. That's the ultimate, really. Yeah, thankfully, I've been able to see it in my lifetime, and it was, it's still the best tour I've watched, and they do very well to beat that, even going forward. So the lift that an overseas player can give to your club, just by their very presence, that's the special thing about particularly when you've got some sort of legendary player. And often in county cricket, we have had that. We've not struggled. Maybe there's an element of the fact that it's our summer and basically everyone else's winter. That's helpful.
Yeah.
But that is to say that, the moral lift that you get, but also just obviously the technique side of things, or the technical side, where somebody like Brian Lara in your dressing room at Warwickshire, another West Indian, that wasn't deliberate. But imagine the wisdom that's just passed. And Brian Lara wasn't particularly, I wouldn't say he was a seasoned player when he was at Warwickshire. He was still obviously one of the best players, probably the best player in the world at that point anyway. But the wisdom and just knowledge on how to play the game of cricket as well, amidst that just lift for the crowd, lift for everyone around the club. So I think if we can, I don't really know where the point is on that point, but there is no harm in having the right overseas player. I think that's the key. And we shouldn't think of it maybe from your question as, there's more to it than just winning 4 games of Championship cricket. I think it actually, for the benefit of England, that's where potentially ECB... Obviously, each club is an individual entity and they need to run how they see fit.
Absolutely.
But is there a school of thought that, someone like Paul Farbrace, just for argument's sake, at Sussex, who is, ultimately, yes, he's English, but also he's a step closer to the England, or a step more linked to the England setup than most, maybe, or some others.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe there is a school of thought for Paul that says, it's important that we're not just producing good players for Sussex, but actually there are some guys that can go on, and whether that's in the form of just making sure that Jofra Archer gets back to a position where he can be reselected, or whether that's someone like Tom Haynes who we can help him on his journey to higher honours, etc., etc. So not overly fussed on using them in that Kookaburra sense.
Yeah.
But I think what an amazing thing to have. And I don't know, again, you were talking about something else in terms of sort of Ranji Trophy and Sheffield Shield, but I think it's a wonderful thing that our clubs can bring over, top talent from overseas, and that point around community, that point around raising the profile and just giving people, sounds very Walt Disney, giving people some joy.
Yeah.
It was incredible. I mean, some of the autographs I collected when I was younger, from overseas players from all kinds of counties. I mean, it's stuff that doesn't really leave you, does it?
No, 100%. And I think you're definitely right. And I think we as cricket fans in England have such a luck around that. And even at the lower level you go. I mean, I played up in Durham and played for a club, and a local. He was just wasn't even overseas at this point, but he was a club legend. At the club I played for was this Marlon Black, who'd played for the West Indies in the late 90s, and he was still come in his summers were in Sunderland and was a big part of this community, and he was beloved by all. So it's kind of almost the trickles down through the whole of our sort of setup. And I guess it's interesting, and again, speaking of things that make county cricket special and different to other domestic circuits, is that you don't have overseas pros in the Sheffield Shield, and you don't have overseas pros in, well, at least to my knowledge, in the Ranji Trophy, and most other domestic circuits you never really see overseas players other than their T20 leagues. So I think it's an interesting one, because there's some part of you which would love to see England players be able to have the chance to play for a Queensland, a New South Wales, and get that experience of playing at the grounds that they might play at if they go on a Test series. It was kind of the aspect I was looking at it from. But in the other side of it, you're so right that I think we have such a history and such a lineage of overseas players playing in our game that it's a kind of unique selling point of what makes our cricket better, almost, I guess. So it's an interesting one of the two sides of it, but I'm a big fan of it. I think seeing the best, and the better the standard of county cricket, the better the standard of player you get out of it. I think it's a very obvious point, I guess, to make.
we've seen a few, and I think there's some. I'm sure you'll enjoy this, but there's definitely been some smaller instances of English cricketers going to some of the, let's say, non-big three countries, or the other big two, let's say, for domestic cricket. I know James Kirtley years ago had played a few games in Zimbabwe.
Right, yeah.
Chris Nash, again, clearly Sussex and West Indies is my sort of knowledge point at the moment, but Chris Nash, I think, has played some domestic cricket. Whether that was first-class cricket, I'm not too sure, but he's played over in New Zealand. Yeah. I'm just thinking of, and potentially Alex Hales as well. I know he's done, I think, definitely some short-form stuff, but it's very few and far between these days. I think in bygone eras, there would have been not loads, but some English players English qualified players that have gone to some of the smaller nations for first class.
I think New Zealand is one that is probably the owner. With New Zealand and Zimbabwe, probably the two places where I can imagine or can think of England players where just on their ESPN Quick Info it says teams played for, and it's Otago or wherever it might have been. But yeah, you're right in that it's just quite a unique thing and quite. Yeah, but I think overseas players. I think it's a wonderful aspect of the county game. But yeah, I guess we're sort of coming to the hour point. So I was sort of we were looking to have this going towards that sort of length. But I guess, is there any burning county championship things you want to talk about, or maybe just a bold prediction, or a player you like, or I guess just the floor is yours, I guess, is where I'm going with this, to sort of where we could go with our sort of last few words here on the pod.
I think I'd be interested to know your thoughts, and maybe have a quick kind of final discussion on that sort of trade-off. We've seen a little bit, and it's a bit of a concern actually of mine, and I guess let's start with that bit of concern that we can convert into a question. But we've seen a little bit, and forgive me, I think it might have been at Hampshire, where there's obviously a lot of commercial involvement from different buyers and different companies that may be interested in coming in and sort of buying clubs outright, and then sort of we're getting into the realms, at worst in my opinion, of a St. Louis Cardinals, or who now play in San Francisco. We have now this structure in the world of sport where ex-owner who owns a football club in Spain and an NFL team and a franchise of restaurants over here, and then they're going to buy a county cricket club and then turn that into a massive franchise and start building big stadia and taking everything away from the community. I'm interested to know kind of what your view is on is the way of the world. Do we really need that sort of money desperately in the English game, or the English and Welsh game, or do we need to actually kind of say, football have put this this new law, this new body has been founded obviously to protect more clubs going forward. Do we need to actually make sure and get ahead of the curve before we start seeing clubs that have been around for a heck of a long time and have enjoyed some amazing traditions and cultures, and have been a focal point of their communities in the summer? Do we need to make sure that is that a worry for you? And B, what can we do to make sure that county clubs are still the forefront and not just going down that route of seemingly many other things in sport that are becoming too franchisey and a little bit kind of commercially driven?
Yeah, I guess it's such an interesting point and such an interesting question, because it's like it comes down to that almost sociological thing of what is the importance of sport in what is it trying to do, and what is it is it do you look at it from the perspective of that sport is just one of the many things that fits into a capitalistic world where big buys small, and whatever in that sense. But I think you're so right in that the protection of things like county cricket is so important. I mean, I guess it's a perfect full circle moment, because we were talking about at the top of the show of like what is the most things that are most powerful and enjoyable about cricket, and in what your answer was that community aspect, and the fact that it can be just for the good, but not good for the making cricketers great, but also for the community and all of the things that come with it. I think it's a real concern. I think it's a really fair concern. I'm not going to pretend it's actually one that I could know which counties are at risk or anything like that, but I know that a lot of counties, just from my research into doing the previews that I did for this show, is that the places like Gloucestershire and a lot of counties are really struggling to make ends meet, and trying to how going forward will that look, what that will look like. And I'm sure the ECB does a lot of subsidising and helping clubs out and all of that kind of thing. But whether or not, as you mentioned, a sort of independent body needs to be, founded almost preemptively. I mean, we just had the news that the Manchester Originals, because they got bought out by whoever owns the Supergiant franchise, are now the Manchester Supergiants. So yeah, to your point, that the franchise is almost affecting other franchises, but that you hope that county cricket can stay kind of pure from that. How much the ECB can do, how much can governance themselves do at the moment, it remains to be seen. But I think you're so right in that it's super important that we don't have a kind of clubs just sort of start disappearing, because as you say, it's such a part of society, and it's such a British thing that each county has a club, and that there's this sort of it looks back on this historical, almost bygone era where counties were a bigger deal and all of this kind of thing. But it's a nice societal thing that it can always go on. So yeah, I think hopefully it's an optimistic vision that in the future that our grandkids will be talking about how all the wonderful things that we say of cricket, and not be saying, oh, how cool is it that back in the 1980s and 1970s that all these great cricketers played in the domestic game, but it's now no longer as a thing, or it's almost minor county cricket. I mean, God forbid, I hope. But it's an interesting one, and then it's a slightly, it can make you worry if you start almost deeping it too much. But I think it's a hope that there's an understanding that, as you say, that county cricket is so important for the future of England cricket, and that is what is the thing that brings in the money. Really, is the international acclaim of cricket teams. So yeah, I hope the ECB. I think they see that as a real worry, and as a real thing to be looking out for, but also a thing that can really actually support the game going forward, and support those smaller counties that are at risk at folding. I mean, I saw that Gloucestershire basically could only sign Cameron Green because they had a wealthy benefactor basically be like, oh, that'd be cool, I heard you guys were interested, sort of thing, and he literally funded the money, and it was just an unnamed benefactor. But the fact that cricket clubs can be that, is that on the edge of being able to sign players and be able to be the clubs they want to be, and showcase themselves, is a bit of a worry, I guess, as well. So yeah, it's an interesting point, and not one that I need to look into a bit more. But I hope,
sure,
I hope that the clubs aren't at so much of a risk. But I think you're probably right that some of them are. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
I've got that's really interesting. I do have, and I know we're sort of wrapping up shortly, but
No.
I'd be keen to know from your perspective as well. I'm I'm certainly not hopefully getting on, but I'm not exactly in your sort of generational bracket, and I'd be keen to know, for you growing up, it's probably going to have a big Sussex sort of element to this, but who really stood out to you as a kind of fate? I can definitely name mine, just with my kind of youthful hat on, but who really stood out to you, let's say at Sussex or in the Championship, and what were your kind of initial memories that really got you hooked on, let's say, red ball cricket overall?
Oh, that is a very good question. It's actually funny. In the first instance, my first ever introduction to county championship cricket is that I had a game on my iPad, very of my generation almost, to your point, and it was called Cricket Captain 2012. Some free promo there for you. But it was like this thing where you could basically take control of a county setup and sort of get your players better. And so I had these weird situations where, I got really into Stefan Pyra, was it? Is it the Yorkshire medium pacer, and all these people who were because you could sign them as a free agent and whatever. So it was actually in many ways there was Sussex players who were really you'd go down and see that. So I remember players like Chris Nash that you mentioned, and when I was very young, I think Murray Goodwin was having great success, and players like that. So there was obviously as you say, that Sussex spin to it. But, I remember being a huge Adil Rashid fan before he'd ever played a game for England, because he was this kind of red ball legend. Because, the fact that he has 10 first-class hundreds is just absolutely ballistic to me, having watched him bat for 10 years in ODI cricket. But for a while, he was just kind of not batting all-rounder, but he was an all-rounder who was a very good leg spinner. Another person to throw into the spin bowlers getting better with age kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that would be my main memory or nostalgia with that game, and then was kind of then looking it up and finding scorecards on ways that I could find scorecards, and then a slow interest kind of grew, and then just as I got through teenage years, and Sussex had a very good T20 team of the sort of late 2010s or mid to late 2010s of often going to finals days, and then as you know. Then there's kind of almost like a cult hero. So I for some reason love playing like Steve McGoffin was just a weird player that I just sort of really loved, and I guess there was all those kind of sort of strange players that you kind of really. Ed Joyce, I remember loving Ed Joyce, but I guess it is just a case of, as you say, it's so localised that there's the players that you just sort of warm to as you do with any sport, of why you like them, God knows, but you love them, and whether or not they're always the team you support or just teams you see. So yeah, I guess I'd return fire with you as we're doing sort of rounding off, but just sort of great county championship names that you love, Sussex based or more generally over your years of watching.
Yeah, it was difficult being a Sussex supporter in the 2000s not to just pick everybody from that side.
Sure.
To see a small club like that, which is still a small club and pretty much always has been, win not only our first county championship, so 164-year wait from club's formation to winning the first title, to then go on and win 3 more in the next 5 years, whatever
absolutely.
It was incredible, amongst all of the one-day trophies that came as well, including my first visit to Lords, which was the 2006 C&G final, where we defended 172 against Lancashire.
Wow.
And Lancashire obviously being the massive club that they are, filled with superstars, lots of overseas talent, your Stuart Laws and your Mal Loys and your Glenn Chappells and your Saj Mahmoods, etc. Flintoff didn't play in that game, I think, due to injury or some sort of other thing going on. Murray Goodwin, easily the name for me that stood out. Just incredible player. Such a consistent performer, but just the sheer weight of runs, all formats, fantastic. I think with my let's say other podcast hat on, or former podcast hat on, from a sort of football perspective, it was always a huge thing. Not that it happened in my lifetime, but I always found it really fascinating, things like shirt retirements or number retirements.
Sure.
Bobby Moore at West Ham. West Ham have retired number 6 a long time ago, I think. And Murray Goodwin, I think, to this day is the only county cricketer I know of, certainly at Sussex, that has had their shirt number retired. Just to sort of, and I think that was the kind of final, I guess, not nail in the coffin, but cherry on the top of the cake, or the cherry on top of the cake, to kind of cement his place. Is just, I remember getting in trouble once at home as well. I'd waited, not even late, but I'd waited a while before coming home to get his autograph after a game, and I was home after hours, and I got a real hairdryer getting back in. But I thought, for Murray Goodwin, we wait.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, no, I think now it's sort of more you speak about Murray Goodwin, it's almost when I remember like first playing cricket growing up. It was just it was this name of this sort of mystical player who just scored so many runs, and then you get old enough that you could jump on a computer and look him up or whatever it was at my age, at sort of 7 or 8 in the late 2000s. Is that you kind of he was at the end of his stardom, or to call it stardom would show where we come from, but you know what I mean. the kind of like legend status, I guess, as you're saying, is these players. So I think but it is also a perfect county cricketer name that it almost any other walk of life you may have absolutely no idea who he is. Anyway, I mean, sorry to last point.
Well, I think just a quick one on that, and I think there's all kinds of discussions obviously that can go on for hours and hours and days and months and whatever, but I think there's that point around, again, sort of broken record time, the county outgrounds in particular, but actually lots of the regular kind of grounds or slightly bigger ones as well that the counties play at. There's that element of what is your question, or we were talking just on the franchise side of things. What is sport about? And I think that point is that what is the main priority of any sport? In my opinion, it really needs to give young people specifically that sort of that opportunity in life it's just a positive influence on their life, isn't it? Whether that's physical, whether that's mental, doesn't really matter. It's both.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that point around the county cricket and outground cricket in particular, you are really at a format of sport where you can really get up close and personal with your heroes or your the people you really look up to. You know, you can go and get an autograph, or speak to somebody at the end of a day's play at Horsham or Guildford or Colwyn Bay or wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas, we've seen a world where in football and maybe even in rugby union, particularly at the bigger places and the NFLs and the tennis, golf, whatever, a lot of people, as soon as you're either very distant anyway. You may not even be at the game, but you may be very distant, and you're not really given that opportunity to actually just even have a conversation, or even to shake somebody's hand and say well played. And I think that memory of, let's say meeting Murray Goodwin or Steve Harmison or whoever it was when I was going to a match, these are happy memories that live with you for a long time. And I think why sort of not why, I know people aren't doing it to deny children that opportunity, but county cricket really does still have that opportunity to give, where young people can meet their heroes and still interact and really feel part of not just the club but actually that player's career, and that can stand them in such good stead going forward for many different aspects of their lives.
No, I think you're spot on. I think it's a perfect way to sort of sum it all up and sum up where this chat, kind of the heart of all of this is both of us who have a deep love of county championship cricket and kind of what it brings, and there's a sort of shared concern about how it might be lost. So I think you're so right in the where cricket is so different. We should celebrate it rather than trying to be like other sports, and not looking like it has to be this entity which makes so much. Only focus is how much money you're going to make, is understanding the positive impacts. I can still remember the sort of the perspective I was at as Ricky Ponting was Surrey's overseas for a T20 Blast season, and I got a high five off him. I can still, in my mind's eye right now, I can still picture it, because it's like, there's a community aspect of it, and at Hove you could go right down to the side and wait with your autograph bats and all of the things that big cricket fans like ourselves can remember, and that county cricket and all the things that come with it can have such an effect, and can have memories that last, and bring sort of experience and memories that will just stay forever. So no, I think it's a perfect way to finish it off. I think this podcast is filled with love for the county championship, but also hoping it can hold on to what we love about it, I guess.
Sure. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak. So many thanks for having me on. I'm sure in future, if ever invited back, obviously you've got a much more illustrious list of people to get through in your sort of guest roster. But it's been really, really, really nice to have a conversation. I think remind ourselves of not just why county cricket is excellent, but it's a very special game overall. I think you and I, I'm sure I'm right in saying follow many different sports, but actually this is the one that it's very difficult to not keep coming back to, and actually when it's come to the one that I'm probably quite obsessed with, it's pretty clear why, even if not from an hour's conversation today. But it's been really good to chat, and many thanks for having me on. No,
thank you. Well, it was, as I said to you the first time I mentioned it, the county chat was always meant to be a chat, and then it was kind of ironic that sort of the first 30 videos I made was me literally in my room talking to no one. So it's been wonderful to be able to talk to someone like-minded, but hear a different perspective and a different thing. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and coming on. And I have no doubt that you will have a future appearance on the County Chat. Maybe we'll have to weave through some good names between then. So stay tuned for that, County Chat fans. But anyway, without sounding too what's the word? Classical for a content creator, but if you've enjoyed this content, make sure you subscribe and like it. I think this will be one of the first episodes I put on Spotify, so hopefully there'll be people to be able to listen in all of that stuff and have enjoyed the conversation. So thank you very much for listening and watching, and thank you again, Omkar, for coming on, and that's been the County Chat. Thanks for watching.